Hey everyone, this is going to be just a real quick video talking about um, what we talk about when we talk about Anne Frank. There's a few things I think are pretty important to discuss. The first of which is subject matter. Okay, and so this is a good story to deal with this, where we talk about really important historical events and whether or not you can actually write about those types of events, and what forms would be effective in doing so. And the short story, because of its length, limits itself to not necessarily being able to encompass all of a subject matter. So, for instance, if you're going to talk about war, um, a novel might be a better creative forum for actually being able to deal with something that large, something like 9/11 or whatever. So we'll talk about this a lot in poetry as well, and how you might deal with these subject matters without uh, being too shallow or moving too quickly. And one of the things would be to find something very, very small that represents a larger whole. So if you can um, look at this story, for instance, um, certainly the story of Anne Frank, which everybody knows in the Holocaust, is the backdrop for this like afternoon with these four friends. Um, and it's super important. But this story is not about the Holocaust or Anne Frank per se. The story is about these people in this afternoon, and because of the limits of the genre, that's probably a smart way to go. Um, the second thing that I think is probably worthy of note here is the humorous tone, which sort of runs counter to. I mean, you read the title, and you have certain expectations, and the fact that it's funny, and they're talking about smoking pot, and they're getting kind of wasted on the afternoon, and that they sort of joke around that way is runs counter to the severity of the subject matter. And so that's way to bring some levity to it. Um, you look at the narrator, who refuses to call Mark Yerusham the converted name, as just an example of that. And you see it in the present tense, the use of the present tense point of view. Uh, if you look at page 43 here, I laugh at that, honestly. I'm liking her more and more. We see, as it is present tense, we begin to like everybody more and more with him. It's a way to keep us present, but also uh, to make the afternoon as surprising to us as it might be for the narrator. Um, the first time we get real serious is this story on page 45 in the locker room in Florida. Um, and uh, I'll just I'll just read it. I mean, the number tattooed, it's the same as my father's camp number, digit for digit, but my father's ends in 8 and this guy's ends in a 5. It's the only difference. I mean, they're separated by two people, so I say, excuse me, sir, and the guy just says, you with the Chabad, I don't want anything but to be left alone. I already got candles at home. I tell him, no, I'm not. I'm here visiting my father, and to my father I say, do you know this gentleman? Have you two met? I'd really like to introduce you if you haven't. And they look at each other over for what I promise you is minutes, actual minutes. It is with kavod, I say. I say this with respect for my father, but it is like watching a pair of big beige manatees sitting on a bench, each one each with one sock on, and they just look each other up and down. Everything's slow, and then my father says, "I seen him around." The other guy says, "Yes, I've seen him." "You're both survivors," I tell them. "Look, the numbers," and they look, and of course, they're talking about the tattoos from the concentration camps. Um, they're the same, I say, and they both hold out their arms and look at the little ashen tattoos. To my father, I say, "Do you get it? The same, except his It's right ahead of yours. Look, compare. So they look, they compare. Mark's eyes are popping out of his head. Think about this, he says. Around the world, surviving the unsurvivable, these two old guys end up with enough money to retire to Carmel Lake and play golf every day. So I say to my dad, he's right ahead of you. Look, a 5, I say. And yours is an 8. And my father says, all that means is he cut ahead of me in line. They're the same as here. This guy's a cutter. I didn't want to say blow it out your ear, the other guy says. I just didn't want to say blow it out your ear, the other guy says, and that's it. And they get back to putting on their socks. And the narrator loves this kind of story because they just sort of end up going about their days. It's like this huge, almost incomprehensible coincidence that these two men shared this experience and they were just a few numbers apart from one another, and they don't care to dive into it at all. But the narrator does. And there might be a couple of reasons for that. One of which might simply be that they've lived it, and so they don't feel the need to get into it. And another might be that one of the ways that we process trauma is to ignore it. And that might be what's going on here. But again, the tone of that small story is kind of a microcosm for the tone of the larger story, which is, this bit all about Anne Frank and the Holocaust. But it's really just about these people. So it's a much smaller, less climactic story in the way that you might expect. I wanted to show you an example of pathetic fallacy, which is on page 54. If we go all the way ahead, my dog's barking at me through the door, if you can hear that. Yeah, very helpful, Peanut. Pathetic fallacy is where the weather indicates either ironically or not ironically what's going to happen. So, like it was a dark and stormy night, for instance, is the most famous example where if you play it straight, what happens on a dark and stormy night is going to be dark and stormy. And if it's a beautiful sunny day, things are supposed to be happy, etc. You can play with that by running in the reverse. So something terrible can happen on a beautiful day when you're not expecting it as a reader. So again, pathetic fallacy here. The perfect clouds in the perfect sky, so that we're both staring out, and suddenly the sky suddenly darkens. It is a change so abrupt that the ladies undo their hug to watch. And that's what happens in the story, because it's been all sort of fun and then getting, talking about getting high and drinking too much and everything like that. And then we talk about this game where the story ends, which is terribly sad, which is, the game is called Who Will Hide Me? And so if there's a second Holocaust, for instance, or something similar, who cares enough about you to risk their life to save your own? Which is kind of at the heart of the Anne Frank story. And for those who hid Jews all throughout the Holocaust. And when the story ends, we realize that they all, 4 of them, realize that Yerucham would not hide Shoshana. And so what is going to happen now, right? Where the story ends, Shoshana pulls back her hand. She does not say it, and he does not say it. And of the 4 of us, no one will say what cannot be said, that this wife believes her husband would not hide her. What to do? What will come of it? And so we stand like that, the 4 of us trapped in that pantry, afraid to open the door and let out what we've locked inside. So they've all realized that you have this marriage between these 2 people, and the one person in the world who should hide you, protect you against the horrors of the world and the violence of a Holocaust or something like that, won't. That he does not love her enough. And then, so where do you go, right? What is, if we were to like, if this were a high school class, we might have an assignment where you say, write the next 5 pages of the story. And do you think that they stay together? Do they get separated or divorced, or do they confront it, or do they just continue living their lives, like with that silent understanding of their marriage is not what they portray their marriage to be, or what they would hope it would be. So in any event, there's a lot of stuff we can take from the story. I hope you liked it, and you can take from it some things that you might be able to incorporate into your own writing. So that's that.